Welcome to Sex and the Solo Girl. Join your host, her inner circle, and expert guests weekly for chats about dating, secure attachment, the solo lifestyle, doing relationships differently, and of course, sex. And here's your host, Janice Formichella.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to another initial episode of Sex and the Solo Girl. This is so exciting. I'm dropping these all in one big lump for everybody to get a taste of what the show is going to be like. And I'm so glad that you're here. For anyone who's been following me for a while, I'm so glad that you've come over to the new show. It means so much to me. If you're new, welcome. I hope you'll let me know what you want to hear from me. If you've been following for a while, I hope you'll let me know what you want to hear from me. And if you've been following, you will know my friend Brian Dunn, who is a favorite guest co-host of mine, and he is back today in the new show. Hey, mate.
Hello. Great to be here. Thank you so much for having me back on your brand new podcast.
It's my pleasure. We're going to continue to do some really cool content together. And Brian has been a very, very, very big support to me through this whole process. And guess what, everyone? He is the one who helped me with the badass cover art that I have. So everybody give Brian thanks and credit for that. First of all, Brian, what has been going on with you? I don't know, past couple weeks. Anything juicy to share?
And
if not, I'll just cut it out.
Yeah, my girlfriend and I are talking about getting married. So that could be happening at some point where, we're talking about what that would look like. Rings, prenuptial agreements, just kind of what our life would look like. So that's something that's on the horizon. We've been together 3.5 years or so. And so that's just kind of the next natural step at some point in the next few years or something. So
that is pretty big. Wow. Well, congratulations. I mean, that's a very intentional way to go about it. The fact that you are simply having conversations about it and getting on the same page or just starting to explore. I mean, what would be the most important thing for you, I guess, to determine through all of these chats?
Yeah, great question. For me, what our lives would look like, that would be the important thing as far as finances and responsibilities and everything like that. Making sure what we set up as far as arrangements is fair, not putting burden on each other, or what looks more equitable and according to what we both feel. We already do really well as far as household arrangements and domestic arrangements.
Yeah, we've talked about that on the show.
For me, just knowing that kind of, especially because the statistics say second marriages have like a higher divorce rate, I want to make sure that I'm comfortable, she's comfortable, we're all above board and we're all on the same page going into this and not rushing into it. Not that we've rushed, but just
this is great. Well, I think you can be together for a long time and then rush the marriage factor because you might think you've ironed out a lot of this. And then, I've seen things go downhill really quickly in long-term relationships after a marriage has happened. So I think you're doing it wonderfully. Wow, this is going to be exciting to watch. And congratulations. And I can't wait to hear more. And I think that this is a great situation and a wonderful example to people out there as to how to do this so that it lasts. Talking about finances is not the funnest thing in the world when you're hoping to, begin a new type of future with someone, but it might not be sexy and exciting, but it gives you a relationship that is sexy and exciting long term. Because communication is the most important thing in a relationship, possibly. And it's something that I'm going to be covering on this show a lot. Brian and I have done previous content on this. We did a 2-part episode, I believe, last year called Difficult Conversations on the previous platform. And I will link to it in the show notes. But we're going to be doing more and more. Today, we're talking about communication. We're just kicking things off with what we both love to talk about the most. And today we're going to be talking about sex, baby, and communication around sex, bedroom conversations, pillow talk, etc. Brian, this was an episode idea of yours. I mean, why did you want to dive into this?
First of all, I love sex, love talking about sex. I think because of just our culture and religion and society, talking about sex within a relationship is sort of taboo. Not everybody is capable of talking about it. We even teach our kids weird names like cookie and whatever for parts. And so it's really uncomfortable for a lot of people to be able to talk about sex, but it's because sex and intimacy is such a crucial part of a healthy relationship, whether you're having a lot or a little or none, whatever is needed by both parties. I think being able to have the skills and the ability and the safety to talk about that is super important. Even if you're good at communicating about other things within the relationship, sometimes sex is sort of that, again, taboo or something that's still challenging to bring up. Maybe there's ego and there's sensitivities around it. You don't want to hurt the other person's feelings, but this is just a one piece of the healthy relationship puzzle that's super important to be able to navigate for long-term satisfaction.
And a lot of couples do initially go to counseling because of sexual issues. One thing that came to mind when I was listening to you talk about as far as couples and communication goes is the way you do one thing is the way you do everything. And I really truly believe that if you can get comfortable talking about sex and if you can have productive conversations with your partner about both of your sexual needs, it definitely will carry on to or into other aspects of the relationship. And I would also say, I mean, this is so like circular. I think the better probably you are communicating about other icky things, parenting, money, etc., outside of the bedroom, that it would carry over. But people don't think of it that way. And this is a great place to start.
Relationship safety of I can say something that might be uncomfortable or awkward, but know that they aren't going to fly off the handle or react badly, that there is that safety to bring things up.
And trust, which is something that you choose to give to someone based on how they react. Another reason that learning about sex communication is so important is sex is about pleasure. I mean, that's what it is for us, at least. We're not trying to procreate anymore. And the better that you can get about communicating your needs, the more satisfaction you both will have. And I also want to mention pleasure is an inside job. We are all responsible for our own pleasure, and we're all responsible for communicating that to our partner. Our partners are not here to read our minds. Our partners are here to listen to us and to, create a beautiful experience together. And so we need to get more and more comfortable talking about all of this so that we can have more and more fulfilling sex.
You bring up such a great point there is the ability to speak up. You're responsible for your needs. It doesn't mean necessarily you go off and do your own thing and get yourself off in the bathroom because the other person didn't. It's more about having this feeling the comfort and the safety to advocate for your own needs and what you want and what's pleasurable to you, especially in heterosexual relationships. Is it's sort of default sex is penis and vagina, missionary, 3 minutes and you're done.
And 3 minutes. Oh no.
Usually not great for a lot of people. And you look at the orgasm gap, the pleasure gap, there's a lot that could be done in terms of understanding each other and understanding each other's needs and having a more pleasurable and fulfilling and satisfying sexual relationships with their partners.
And we are going to take a deep dive into how to do that, from everything from safety to sexiness and all over. Let's dive in. First thing that everybody must get comfortable with is talking about sexual safety. I don't think we need to go into all of the reasons why. However, I will say that I think a lot of people actually have more trouble with this than we would think. I think a lot of people get into new relationships or have sex with people for the first time without bringing this up. Even people who, I don't know, are good at communication can get caught up in the moment or just simply not want to be uncomfortable because they haven't practiced it. I think a lot of us get it in our heads that these are very sterile, rigid, boring conversations that you sit down and have to have with someone, which I think can leave a lot of uncertainty as to how it's going to end. But we've got some fun ways that you can do this, even having fun or getting closer with people. I also want to say, when you're kind of getting to know someone initially and you may be having a sexual encounter that you weren't completely expecting, getting used to at least asking if one of you has protection, especially if you're having penetrative sex. if you can get really used to kind of cutely asking that before you go home with someone, and then that will lead to another conversation about barrier use after. So it's a matter of, yes, practicing and then maybe having some go-tos. I do think sometimes getting comfortable putting things out ahead of time via text can actually be great if you actually have the ability to think things through and think about the future and think about what may be coming with a new partner. And just even before the date, once you think that things are starting to happen, just put it out there by text. It does help the anxiety a bit. You let the other person think about it where they're not sitting there looking at you. And I do think that it can help get some uncomfortable shit out there. It helps you with practice, and it also allows the pressure to go down. If you talk about sexual safety and health before you go on the date, I think you can enjoy the moment a little bit more. So maybe come up with your own little script and just boom, boom, boom. Whenever you are getting to know someone and hoping to have sex with them, just do it. We want to talk about communicating boundaries and how it relates to sex and intimacy. Why don't I hand it over to you? What is a boundary? And perhaps how does this tie into communication? I think that might be somewhat obvious. Yes, communicate your boundaries. But I think there's a lot more to it than that, right?
Yeah. So boundaries at their core are just a line of separation. So in this sense, we're talking about limits that we set to protect our time, energy, our emotional and mental, physical well-being. So they allow us to create space for ourselves to operate and to meet our own needs in relationship with others. It can look like disengaging or refusing to engage in conversations that make you feel uncomfortable. It can look like saying no to requests that you don't want to do. So you don't have to say yes to everything every time somebody says, can you help me with this? Can you do this?
We're talking about communication. And so, yes, hopefully you will be with a partner who's communicating what they want, maybe encouraging your partner to communicate what they want. And it's all fine and dandy for someone to communicate that, but it's a two-way thing. And yes, having boundaries and practicing saying no to something that you're not 100% a yes.
Yeah. In those conversations, for example, you may have been on a date or not, but you're texting. Maybe they, out of the blue, say something sexual or an innuendo, or you're on a date and they make some joke and you're not comfortable with that yet. So the boundaries allow you to say, that's not comfortable for me, or I'm not comfortable talking about that yet. Mm-hmm. So just being able to set that boundary and put the ball in their court to see, do they respect your boundary, or are they going to keep pushing you?
Thank you. What is the difference between a boundary and an ultimatum?
So an ultimatum is something where you set and you want to control in order to get your desired outcome from someone else. So a boundary is to protect you of what you will and won't allow in your life. So just kind of an example of parent talking to a child saying, if you change your major from pre-med to history, we're not going to pay your tuition anymore. That's an ultimatum, getting a desired outcome by changing your willingness to continue to support them. Mm-hmm. A boundary is if you keep talking to me like that, or if you keep bringing up that topic, I'm not going to engage in this conversation anymore. Mm-hmm. So you're protecting yourself versus trying to control the other person. Boundary versus ultimatum.
Oh, this is interesting. I haven't thought too much about this, to be honest. Do you have any other examples? This is kind of like doing my mind in right now.
Yeah. So
trying to think of the differences. Well, so maybe like a boundary versus an ultimatum in like either sex or relationships. Can you think of anything?
Well, let's just go to boundary. A personal story. I started dating somebody. We had a really great first date. I don't normally go home with people on the first date, but we happened to. That night, we were on her couch kissing, and it was kind of moving forward. And she paused things and said, I need to tell you, I don't sleep with people unless we're exclusive and we're exclusively dating. Mm-hmm. And this was the first date. And for me, I wasn't ready on a first date to say, okay, let's be exclusive. So I said, okay, that's totally fine. I respect your boundary. We don't have to have sex tonight. I'm not comfortable jumping into a relationship after a few hours after one date. So we won't have sex, and we'll just wait until, when we are ready to do that. So we did not have sex. We continued to date, and 3 weeks later, we quote unquote consummated the relationship and we were exclusive, but that was her boundary. And that was really great. That was really positive and confident of her to be able to say, let's put a pause on this.
So how would it have looked like as an ultimatum?
As an ultimatum would have been either before or after having sex, saying, if we're not exclusive, then we can't do this. Or you have to stop seeing other people. You have to cancel all any other conversations, or I won't do this, or I won't continue to do this.
All right, I might actually talk with you more about this off the air because I've got a little predicament of my own here. I really think this all sounds well and good, but how do you know what your sexual boundaries are? And then do you just practice expressing them? How do you think that a person really discovers this ahead of time? I'm always telling people, I work with lots of people who have been through breakups, divorce, and when they come to me and say that they want to date again, I often say, of course, my first question is why? I think that reveals a lot. And then I always say, okay, well, so what have you discovered? What have you journaled? What are you clear as far as your boundaries go? And people are often a complete deer in headlights because they haven't thought it through. And I mean, sex is something that we're continually discovering, and our sexuality is very fluid and always evolving. So how do you think someone can get clear on what they want to go into a new sexual relationship with as far as being firm about?
I think you hit on some of it, which is like thinking about talking it through, journaling about past experiences. Part of that is like listening to your body, whether that's looking back or in the moment. A lot of times we say yes, even though kind of internally we don't feel comfortable. We just want to not rock the boat, or we want to please the other person. I think that comes with experience and reflection. So you could be 19 or you could be 32 without much dating, relationship, sex experience. Without experience, it's hard to know, I'm comfortable with this, I'm not comfortable with that.
Right.
So being able to gain that data, gain that experience, and giving yourself enough grace and time and space to reflect on that. That made me uncomfortable. I didn't like that. Even if it's looking back, I didn't like how I was treated, or I didn't like how they pushed me. I didn't like that conversation, but I didn't say anything. I was afraid to speak up and say that makes me uncomfortable. But kind of being reflective on that and honoring yourself over kind of the feelings or the ego or the not rocking the boat of the conversation with other people, honoring yourself over those things and saying, if I don't like this, if this doesn't make me comfortable, I'm going to say no, I'm going to speak up.
This goes perfectly into our next topic, and that is, I do think that sometimes boundaries in sex can be about your gut and where you give consent. We are now going to talk about consent, and I do think that a lot of people frame discussions around consent from the standpoint of gaining consent rather than giving consent. And I think having boundaries in sex is a lot about getting really comfortable giving or not giving consent, what feels right. So yeah, let's talk about this. This is a topic that I really, really, really get excited about. So Brian, what is consent? What can you share with people as far as what it is other than just yes and no questions?
Yeah, I love the FRIES model. I don't know if it's Planned Parenthood or somewhere else that came up with it, but FRIES stands for freely given, reversible, informed, enthusiastic, and specific. So if you're thinking about fries, can I have a fry? Sure, you can have one. Do they keep taking another fry and more fries? Do they cover it in mustard and you don't like that? Do they want fries next week because you said yes today? So it's specific. You can have one fry. I can change my mind. I want you to stop taking fries. I don't want you didn't say you were going to put mustard on the fries because that's gross and I don't want that. So, and am I saying, I guess, or am I not saying anything or being sure? Yeah, go take a fry. And I said yes to one fry, but you took a giant handful of fries. So that is all freely given, reversible, informed, enthusiastic, specific. So that's kind of the core tenet of what consent is. There is explicit consent, like verbal yes, no. There's implied consent. So if you're on a date, you're making googly eyes and you're close and there's body language, that's sort of implied consent, maybe not 100%, but there's implied consent that it's okay to move a little bit closer. If I say, close your eyes, come here. and I move 90% of the way in that last 10%, you come in, that's implied consent because we're getting closer and closer and closer. People who say, I just want it to be spontaneous, they're assuming all of the magical Hollywood kind of rom-com type stuff that goes behind the scenes of the body language and in the building up of that tension.
Yeah.
If you're in the middle of Starbucks and talking about your favorite color and where you grew up, and somebody jumps across the table,
totally,
that's not implied, that's not building up. Mm-hmm. This leads into like other parts of sex and intimacy, but you don't have to say, can I kiss you? You can say, I can't talk right now, I'm just distracted by your lips, or I've wanted to kiss you all night, or what would you say if I wanted to kiss you right now? So those are ways to ask for consent, bring it up, express desire without saying, can I kiss you right now? Do I have your permission?
To say the can I kiss you, that's pretty hot. Let's not toss that completely out the window. Yeah. I've had that question asked to me even recently, and I thought it was very, very sexy. Yeah. But yes, you are absolutely right. There's a number of ways to gain even explicit consent and verbal consent. Yeah. And play with what you think works for you and what you feel comfortable and natural with. And if you're the one asking for the kiss the first time, I mean, seriously, if you do it right, you're going to have that other person wrapped around your finger for some time to come.
Yeah, I think that's a great point you bring up, is that everybody has their own sort of tastes or preferences and kind of definitions of what is sexy, what is not. So you think that's sexy, and maybe in the moment it's sexy, maybe in another kind of moment it's not that great. I've had times where I asked and they sort of giggled and said, of course, and then we kissed. I had one person where she gave me implied consent. So I didn't think the second date was going that great, but I was walking her to her car outside. It was kind of drizzling a little bit. She's in front of me. She turns around. She puts her arms around my shoulders. And there's implied consent. She's like waiting for the kiss.
Yeah, completely.
But even after that, I wanted to kiss her. I said, can I kiss you? And she sort of teased me. She says, of course, you don't have to ask me. So it's going to be different for every person, but it's better to be safer and more communicative than less in assuming that something's okay.
And we just touched on boundaries, and that would be, yes, a boundary that maybe you hadn't had written down in your journal, which is totally fine. You can decide in the moment what a boundary is. And the point of this episode is encouraging you to speak up and to use your words and communicate when that happens. Yes, we want people to communicate about asking for consent for sure, but even more importantly, communicating about giving consent and communicating about something that you won't give consent around. And I would encourage people really just learn to listen to your intuition. And then even just in day-to-day matters, if something doesn't feel right with mom, with your sister, with your dog, if your gut is telling you this is not for you, practice that way. Practice before you get into situations that are a little more high stakes or a little bit more tricky or confronting, potentially awkward. I think that you'll learn about consent and boundaries at the same time. Let's talk about fun ways to ask for consent in a new sexual relationship, because it's not just about asking, can I kiss you? When you move into the bedroom, I mean, man, we're talking about a world of possibilities that can come up every time that you're with this person, which is one thing that I love so much about sex and getting to know both your own sexuality and your partner's. I'm reading a book right now called The Art of Giving and Receiving, and it's a lot about just that, communicating about what your partner wants and what you want. And something that I've kind of been playing with is just asking the person, how would you like me to touch you? I don't know if this sounds prescriptive to some people, but I think this is very sexy. And then also maybe saying something like, where do you want to be touched? I think that some people might not quite know how to respond to these questions. It's a good way to practice communicating and looking at consent and getting to know the person, getting to know yourself. What about you, Brian?
I like your question and your examples there. I think taking how would you like me to touch you? I think that's very direct, maybe a little bit, depending on when that happens, that might be a little bit too soon. I could see, how do you like to be touched? Because I could be on a first date and that could be like a very charged kind of sensual conversation. How do you like to be touched? And so it's not like you touching me. How do you want me to touch you? It's in general, I like, I've had dates where we played the card game. Like there's a truth or drink based on like a YouTube channel that does these things. And there's like a deck of cards, and my date chose the sexy time one. So there's ways to talk about sex and kind of around that space without having to be directly, how do you want me to touch you? Because that's sort of inviting, implying consent, or implying like something that's going to happen. I think there's different ways to phrase it. What turns you on? Like, what do you like? And I think just being able to be comfortable enough to know what it is you like first. That's like the first step. Actually, I've never thought about that. Where do I like to be kissed? Where do I like to be touched? Do I like soft? Do I like soft kisses, soft touches on my back or my knees or my legs? Do I like hard pressing? Like getting to know yourself is like that first step to communicating it to someone else.
Yes, and as far as that goes, it is a lot of experimentation. And I think when somebody asks you what you want or what you like, what are you into, sometimes you need to still discover that. But it does start with making a request. And like you said, consent is reversible. All of these are things you can change your mind about. But I would just encourage people to just really go inwards and then just ask for something. And it can be adjusted. And especially if you're looking to continue the sexual relationship with someone, this is something that you guys can keep playing with over time. And we are going to talk a lot about how to make communication sexy so that this adds so much to what is going to go on in the bedroom. Let's talk about our own journeys with sexual communication. You touched on the card game that you played. How else? I mean, why was that? Why does that stand out to you as something that helped you around sexual communication? Or do you have anything, any other anecdotes or aha moments as far as when you really started to think that you were getting this down?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And it goes back to what I said about reflecting and discovering ourselves. Like my journey post-divorce, long journey, and the No More Mr. Nice Guy book, Dr. Robert Glover, that was really important for me to realize that my own needs and wants were important in kind of being able to advocate. There's that word again, advocate for myself. And that came through being able to say, I have needs, this is kind of what I want, and have those discussions. The other part of that equation was kind of coming out of a very Christian, very evangelical upbringing, taboos around sex, and then also understanding, kind of coming to the realization that women like sex, they enjoy sex, they like talking about sex, and especially the talking about women don't mind talking about sex. And so
we talk about it to each other.
Yeah. So that was sort of mind blowing for me when I was like 30, 35 and kind of coming to that realization. So getting to the point where as long as it's comfortable and safe and not like a unsafe or threatening or coercive way, that those conversations can be fun and sexy and healthy within like the right space. I brought up the card game because that was like second date during the pandemic. Restaurants weren't open.
Wow.
But I brought some like salads and stuff from Trader Joe's, a couple of Duralogs, a picnic blanket. We were on the beach.
I want this date now.
Bluetooth speaker. Take notes if you want a fun date idea. But we were on the beach, had the fire going, and then I said, okay, how about I brought this card deck game, Truth or Drink. Not sponsored, but it's a great kind of party game. And there's like 4 or 5 card decks. And I said, okay, these are the topics. She picked the sexy time one. And then we just went through like for an hour or two, just talking about our answers to all these different questions. So it wasn't about, or the things that I want to do to you, or I want to have sex with you. It was talking about our own likes and desires and wants and everything within that space. And so we made out that night, but it wasn't kind of that direct, kind of confrontational, aggressive turning into sex. It was understanding and having the conversation around our own beliefs and values and likes around sex.
I'm enjoying this. And we are going to talk more about spicing things up and making this fun and easy in a moment. I will say, for me, I have, for whatever reason, had this in me to a certain extent. I'm not exactly sure why. I was in a marriage during my 20s where I think I learned a lot about this, and maybe because of that, just generally got comfortable using my voice. Plus the fact that I do like to talk during sex, I suppose. And I find communicating like a turn on for me. However, I will say that I went through a number of years where I would initially definitely use my voice, definitely say what I liked or didn't like. But when someone violated my boundaries or even consent to a certain extent, that is when I would shut down. And I do have some, as probably every woman listening does, have some experiences that are hard to think about because of the coercive nature of what ended up happening. And it was yeah, like I said, there was a point where there was a violation happening and I wouldn't know how to navigate that. And that was definitely something at a certain point that I wanted to turn around, because I did have feelings after the encounters of not just feeling generally unfulfilled, but I have to say, like, I internalized it and I felt angry with myself because I knew that I had an opportunity to use my words, but I wasn't ready or there yet or comfortable or whatever. It was when I started doing orgasmic meditation that things just completely turned around for me in my relationships and definitely sexual communication. I used to do something called orgasmic meditation, or OM, and it is a partnered clit stroking practice where you practice with someone for roughly 15 minutes and guide them on how that they touch your clit. And it's a non-sexual practice. I know that people find that very hard to believe, but it is. And it's about communication and pleasure and desire. And when I got used to asking for and making requests as far as that goes, and talking about something so intimate, that is when, I mean, really it changed my life, to be honest. I started having better boundaries in my relationships. I was someone who would keep things inside and let resentment build. When I was with a man, I stopped doing that. My sex became better. My friendships became better. I also was able to access a lot more pleasure and joy, which is a side note. That's what turned it around for me. I know that that's probably not the way that everyone is going to learn how to talk about sex, but that was my starting point, I suppose.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and it goes back to what you said. How you do one thing is how you do everything.
Yeah.
So whether you start through the orgasmic meditation, or it's about standing up for yourself or setting boundaries in the workplace or with your family, it's a muscle, it's a skill. And if you can speak up and advocate and set boundaries in one place, it's a lot easier to do that in other places.
And the way that it's helped my sexual life is, I mean, I can't even put into words. It completely changed things for me. And also I've had a lot of partners say that they love how communicative I am. Before we get into all the fun ways to do this, and come on, we're talking about pillow talk here, so we're gonna really, really lighten it up and talk about how to make it fun and add sexiness and add turn on to your sexual encounters. Let's touch on, though, post breakup, post divorce, wanting to start things up again with people, you know, romantically, sexually, feeling really stuck for so many reasons, and kind of how to navigate those. Like, what are the issues that come up, and how can we, I suppose, overcome them so that, you know, I always say the breakup is an opportunity for a magical new beginning. What role can sex and communicating about sex play? And also, Brian and I were both married for a long time to other people, and then had to learn all of this. So we definitely know of what we speak.
I can definitely speak from experience on this, having been married to someone for 17 years. I got married when I was 20, father at 21. So I didn't have a lot of experience prior to that. But my first sexual relationship after my divorce was kind of nerve-wracking. And there's a lot of things that I'm sure a lot of people can relate. Men have some above and beyond what women might feel, or like different types of things women might feel. Of course, everybody would feel like nervous about being naked in front of somebody. What are they going to think of my body? Am I attractive? Men specifically might feel performance anxiety. Can I get hard? Can I stay hard? Can I put a condom on? Because with my ex-wife, I didn't use a condom for many years.
Oh,
so what does it feel like with a condom? Can I stay hard long enough? What is the feeling like? Can I actually orgasm with a condom on? And so these were some issues I actually had with that first partner about being able to perform with the condom and stay hard long enough and orgasm. And that took a good couple months before it was a little bit more regular that we could go all the way and have like a complete experience. But she was very understanding. It was about the communication and the safety and the trust within that relationship, because a man could have a one night stand or like go home with somebody or third date, whatever, and be all in his head about, am I going to be able to perform? Am I going to be able to get hard? Is she going to laugh at me? Whatever. Because you're so in your head, it takes you out of your body, and it's sort of self-fulfilling prophecy. So that can be very nerve-wracking, very hard, especially for men kind of in the performance department to think about. But again, it comes back to having that kind of an established trust and safety within the relationship, or at least with that person. Whether you say, I'm having a little bit of trouble, let's try something else for a while. For me, sometimes it was, that's not happening, so let me do something else. Let me go down on her for a little bit and then come back to that. And maybe because I'm focusing on something else and not my own dick and whether I'm hard or not, then sometimes it would just kind of naturally I would get hard again. So that is sort of either navigating that and not focusing on if I don't get hard, if I'm not able to do XYZ, then I'm not a man or whatever that is, versus, this is about pleasure and mutual pleasure and enjoying the experience and exploring each other's bodies.
Well, two things. First of all, this is going to be an episode I'm actually developing right now about male performance issues, etc. So please keep your eyes on this space, everyone. Two things come to mind. Well, one thing especially, and I don't know if this is exactly germane to the conversation, but one thing I will put out there is these types of performance issues. Everybody always remember, or at least I would encourage you to take on as a philosophy around sex, is orgasm does not have to be the goal. The goal, I think, should be enjoying the moment together and getting pleasure out in the moment and experiencing the moment for what it is, rather than looking towards some type of finish line that really says nothing about whether or not the experience overall was meaningful or connective. That might help you, and I think that it will help people have just generally more expansive sexual experiences if you're not constantly thinking about whether you're going to come or they are going to.
Yeah, for men, for like the penis related issues, you can tell if it's in your head psychological, if the issues don't occur in other contexts, like when you're alone or whatever that is, and they're only happening in the context of I'm in the bedroom or I'm wherever with this person. If it's happening everywhere, then that's like a urological or it's kind of a physiological issue that you should have checked out. But oftentimes it's like the pressure of being in that new situation with that new person that you haven't been in that kind of situation for a long time. And that pressure to perform can be very hard, no pun intended, to overcome. So that's something that, again, communication and safety and trust and all that. And I know women, from my experience, it was the performance side of things. I know women go through their own, whether it's body image or physical safety, all that kind of thing, other sorts of issues. And everybody has different sorts of anxieties or things that come up based on their own past experiences and dealing with kind of what that might look like for future partners. But for me and for a lot of men, I think, especially trying to get into a new relationship or being with new partners, and that can be something that comes up that can be helped and navigated and overcome, surmounted via communication and trust.
I look forward to diving a lot more into this with maybe you and another expert that we know. Something that's coming up as I'm listening to all of this. First of all, sounds a little rough. I am so glad that I am a woman. I think some men think the opposite, but this is a lot. I do have to say, I don't envy having to navigate that as a man. I also think this is a lot, I feel, to put on a new relationship with someone who you're excited that you're just getting to know, and then sitting down and trying to, first of all, explain the divorce, then explain how it has been a while, then explain, these insecurities you have and that this might happen or this is happening. Wow. I mean, do you have any tips? I mean, from your own personal experiences, how to maybe take a little bit of the pressure off and have these talks? I mean, if I'm just barely dating someone who I met and all of a sudden we're having this really loaded conversation about his background and his insecurities about his performance.
I don't know that would necessarily come up over like dinner on a second date. Like,
okay.
I'm worried I'm not going to get hard for you. That doesn't really come up. It's more in the moment. And if it comes up, I think it can also come down to like the expectations of men and kind of the ascribing of virility and getting hard and all that, and kind of the default missionary kind of penis and vagina sex for heterosexual couples. I think that can be a part of it, kind of that pressure of, I need to be a real man. And if I'm not, she's going to laugh at me and I'm not a real man and I'm a failure or whatever. And so I think one thing that we talked about you can divert to or go to instead is 4 words, what are you into? And this, I love Dan Savage. He's a commentator, advice columnist, author, speaker, et cetera, et cetera. But he's a gay man. He says heterosexual people should borrow from the gay community. What are you into? Because you got 2 men or 2 women or whomever. It's not just the default woman lays on her back, spreads her legs, and the man inserts himself. There's a lot of other things, a lot of other ways to have pleasure and enjoy each other. So what are you into? So that could be, I really like massages or having my thighs kissed or whatever, whatever that is. Thinking more about the pleasure of the experience and not just defaulting to stereotypical image of what sex should be or needs to be in order to count as sex.
I love it. And along those lines, let's talk about having it be sexy, communicating to spice things up, not just communicating about safety and consent and all of this. I mean, come on, we are talking about sex. Let's make it sexy. Passion and variety are important, and this does come with practice. I can imagine some people are listening thinking that this is out of range for them. But, being able to talk through things in general is so important for a relationship. And I would guess that anyone out there who has an extremely fulfilled sex life would say that they're on the better side of communicating about it. So what are some guidelines as far as making it easier and more fun, this, that, and the other? Especially, I think that communication is a huge part of foreplay. And I think that foreplay begins even maybe right after, hopefully, or in some good relationships, the foreplay could start right after the last sexual experience, and maybe thinking about the next one. Communicating, flirting with your partner can be a great way to have foreplay. Texting during the day can be foreplay. How you treat each other in general can be foreplay. So let's talk about communication outside of the bedroom and communication as a form of foreplay.
I think you make a great point in that sex is an act that 2 or more people do together, maybe sometimes solo, but normally, like in that situation, we're talking about it's 2 people, but the foreplay is sort of the lubrication or the connection that maintains, builds, etc., desire to get into that bedroom or wherever sexual situation. So it's not just turning on the oven to preheat it, it's building the appetite, maintaining the appetite and the connection, desire for the other person. I think it starts with knowing yourself and reflecting on yourself, what it is you want, what it is you want to communicate, what you like, what you don't like, and being able to have those conversations outside the bedroom. Like in the heat of the moment isn't necessarily the time to give like a lecture or like talk about all the what you like, what you don't like, or stop doing this, stop doing that, unless it's like painful or whatever. But having, hey, let's have a conversation about some things we could try or what I like. I like how you did this. So knowing what it is, having a conversation outside the bedroom, being able to express as a need or desire, not a complaint. I hate it when you do this. Would you stop doing that? You're such a bad lover. You're the worst lover I've ever had. That's not the best way to go about it.
No.
If you want things to improve, it's more about expressing gratitude and thankfulness. I love what we have, and we have great connection, and I would love to do more of this. So expressing as a need, can you help me fulfill this need rather than stop being so bad? So I would love to feel more connected. I come really quickly, or I come multiple times when you do this certain thing. So can we try more of this? I've always wanted to try that thing over there. Well, what are your thoughts on trying something different? So being able to have that conversation as a let's make things better, not a things are so bad conversation.
Agreed. That's what it's all about anyways. So two suggestions that I would give as far as making your desires or what you like more known. After you have a sexual encounter and you might be connecting, cuddling, chatting in bed, I like to do something that's called frames, which is also something we learn in orgasmic meditation, but it definitely transcends that. And a lot of people use it in other practices or yes, in general. And that is after the encounter, sharing with each other each something that you enjoyed from the encounter, something that you would like to do again, something that possibly you noticed or stood out to you about the experience that you just shared. I mean, and that can be an amazing way to share and accelerate intimacy with you and this person. If that is something that you're wanting, especially long term, kind of making a practice or a routine out of that is actually a really beautiful thing. And then, as a part of foreplay, just sending a text message in the middle of the day and saying, oh, I was just thinking about when you did this last time. And oh, I can't get this out of my mind. And I'd like to try this again. It's
Definitely
something that can be hot, hot, hot.
Yeah.
And that brings us to the other thing. Let's talk about sexting. This is one of the funnest ways to learn how to communicate sexually. I am a big fan of this myself. And I also think that it could be a learning curve. I know from my own experience and being someone who talks to everybody about sex, even to a fault, that I am more confident and comfortable with this than a lot of people. I think maybe we can each share tips on how to get started with this. For me, yeah, I would suggest if someone wants to bring this into their relationships is it does not have to be pornographic and creative and you know, what are you wearing and this and that. And you can start with what I just said, and that is just simply sharing something from the last time you were together that you liked. Or perhaps if you're not as sexually active, you can simply say maybe something about the last time you kissed, and yeah, just leave it at that. I mean, I think talking about fantasies is great and healthy, and I think we're going to get into that a little bit, but just as a starting point. What do you think, Brian?
I think sexting is like a skill, and some people like it, some people don't. Some people are good at it, some people aren't. It's sort of like dirty talk. Some people like it, some people don't. Some people are good at it, some people aren't. My girlfriend says stuff in bed, but she can't say anything like that outside of bed. It just, she has no idea. And it's like her brain clicks when we're in bed and all of a sudden she's saying these things. So I think there's context and like skill. I think testing the waters, whether it's like flirting over text or even having that conversation over dinner or whatever it is. What do you think about sexting? And what are you comfortable with? Like gauging what they're comfortable with. Oh, we could send picture. I could send you a picture or say things, dirty things, and kind of gauge each other's level and comfort level and ability level through that. Same with dirty talk. So I think it's understanding the other person. Janice, you may really like a guy. You've been seeing him for a month, great sex. You send him a picture and you have built up in your head, oh, here's this great picture. And he says, nice. Or he doesn't respond, and then you've built up and you have these expectations of how he's going to respond, and maybe he doesn't know how to respond, or he's doesn't give you the response that you want out of it. And then it creates like an awkwardness. Say in that situation, next time you see him, say, hey, instead of like beating yourself up about it, like maybe I'm not as hot as I thought, or maybe my body doesn't look right or whatever. Next time you see him, say, hey, I sent that picture and I didn't quite get a very enthusiastic response. Was like not a great picture, or are you not comfortable sexting? Or like be curious about it rather than blaming yourself and or blaming him. Just be curious and have a conversation about it so you can understand, oh, he doesn't like those kind of pictures, or he was just caught off guard and he didn't know what to say, or he was with his friends or whatever it was. Be curious and seek to understand and build up like, what are you comfortable with?
I also think when it comes to sexting, sharing frames and thinking about what you want to share that you enjoyed. And then even just saying, I can't wait for tonight. And maybe if you have something new that you'd like to request, just putting it out there in a text. But yeah, I guess it is definitely a two-way thing, and making sure that both people are equally comfortable with the explicitness, I suppose.
You brought up a really good word, fantasy. And I think whether or not in your mind it's a fantasy, I think there are things that a lot of us are curious about. We wanted to try. Maybe we saw in a video or we read in 50 Shades of Grey or whatever. So I think that's a good conversation to have outside the bedroom.
Yeah.
Whether that's like, do you have any fantasies? Are there any things you would love to try? That may even look like a yes, no, maybe list. So that's kind of like not a beginner level, but it's kind of a little bit more advanced. Hey, let's go find a yes, no, maybe list. A bunch of different things on there, and we write yes, we would want to do this. No, we're not comfortable. Maybe it's sort of on the table, and then we compare lists and say, oh, we both say yes to this. So how about we try that next time? So it's getting on the same page, kind of literally with the list, but having that conversation outside the bedroom. Let's have more fun. Let's have more pleasure. Let's explore.
And I mean, let's talk about like practical ways to do this. I've been asked often, what are your fantasies? And I mean, yeah, of course I do fantasize about things, but I'm always like, I don't know. I feel a little, I guess, thwarted when someone asks me something. I'm like, I know what I'm into, but my fantasies?
Someone who's consistent and a good communicator and emotionally intelligent. And see how they respond.
That's what turns me on. Oh, I love it. Yeah, I mean, that's definitely cute. Okay, so first of all, you could say something like, what turns you on? What are your turn-ons? I have found that when I ask men what type of porn they watch, that not only very impressed with the question, that also gives me an idea, and that leads to more discussion about what types of sex they often like. I mean, I don't think that porn exposure necessarily always translates to what you're into, but it opens the conversation, and it's pretty hot. Brian mentioned the yes, no, maybe lists. I think that this is also something really fun to do outside of the bedroom. I'll link to some in the show notes. There are so many things online. And this also takes the pressure off of just tell me what you're into, with just being kind of stuck in the moment. And so I'll link some of those. There are the, green light, yellow light, red light tests, hundreds of them online, and you can each take them. And then, maybe you're on the phone and you start talking about it. Maybe you text back and forth about it. Maybe, you're at dinner and it comes up. And I think if both partners are open-minded and actually dedicated to healthy communication, that these could lead to such great conversations that can bring you together emotionally, can increase the intimacy, and add a lot to your sex life for sure. And then one of my favorite things is the very, very, very extensive BDSM test that is out there. I will also link to that. Brian and I have both taken this. There is a short one. I only suggest personally the long one, because yes, I think it is actually named the BDSM test, but this thing has got like 100+ questions. It covers everything from vanilla to on the extreme sides of kinky and BDSM-y.
But the important thing is, it doesn't ask you what you are. It asks you questions, and then you sort of discover sort of interests or curiosities that you may have. I never knew I was a rope princess or a bunny or whatever it is.
Yeah, same. Like I said, it's so extensive, and I was actually even a little surprised, with my results. But what I've done even recently, and even though I've taken it before, I took it, my new partner took it, and then we came and chatted about it. We shared each other's results, and it was just such a great way to get a conversation going around what we may like to try, and also what we were into doing right then. These are all fun things that you can do outside of the bedroom, so that it I guess, loosens things up a bit. And then one last thing that I wanted to say, and this came up when I was talking about, I think, the red, yellow, green. What I said was that I think it will work if both people are open-minded and both people open to communicating and getting better at communication. I will say this is maybe going to be a great indicator of moving forward with this person. I do think that these are confronting things to a lot of people. I think that it does cause some people to completely shut down. I think that some people are just generally not curious about really getting to know the other person and what their sexual needs are. I think someone who can't have these conversations might be someone who's not good at communicating, not good at conflict, not good at confrontation. Because as we keep on saying, the way you do one thing is the way you do everything. If you're listening to this and getting excited and turned on about improving your communication, I would say look at how the other person responds when you do. It will say a lot.
I think that's such a great point. And if a healthy, varied, experimental, kind of whatever it is, kind of sex life is important to you, and that's one of your deal breakers, then having somebody who's also open-minded and can communicate about those things, that's also going to be important for you and a partner. If you are just once a week, once a month, whatever, missionary, and the other person is fine with that, then these might not be as important, but being on the same page and having somebody who's compatible with that with you is super important. I think the other thing to think about is how boundaries and consent play into this, because I do think there are, especially among men who think, oh, I'm a dom. They just think it's being rough and abusive, when dom sub is about consent and the sub having more say and more power even, and just understanding that it's not just about being rough and whatever, but there is the consent around that, and the dom understanding all of the consent and the boundaries of the other person. So if somebody says, oh, I'm super this, that, but they're not asking you about your boundaries and about your consent, then that is a red flag that they're just sort of want to be abusive and play out some sort of fantasy that they have.
Yep. And that's what this all comes down to, is making it a mutually wonderful experience. And sex is a really important, wonderful, beautiful part of life. And so let's make it count. Brian, thank you so much for being here. And yeah, everybody, let's go out there this weekend and have a good time. As some people may know, I'm going to be collecting emails and questions and comments and all sorts of things from my listeners so that I can start reading them on the air. If you have a question about anything we covered today, Brian will be back soon. We can read your question. We can both give insight. If you have a dating question you would like me or both of us to answer, please email me, hit me up on Instagram. If you just generally have a comment, that is great. Any way that I can support you through the show. And anything that you have questions about as far as the other topics go that I will be covering: non-monogamy, sexual positivity, dating, breakups, solo living, let me know. In the meantime, everybody, take a couple of things from this episode to play with the next time that you're getting to know someone. I assure you, as confronting as it may seem to some of you, you can absolutely learn how to do all of this, and your sex life will greatly benefit from it. I promise you. Brian, any last words?
You can find me on my website at briancdunn.com or on Instagram, TikTok at mrbriancdunn. It's been an honor and a pleasure to be here on your new show with you, Janice, and it's been a great conversation. Had such a blast.
I think so too. All right, I will see you soon, Brian, and I'm hoping that everyone has a great rest of the week. Bye.
Thank you for listening to Sex and the Solo Girl with Janice Formichella, the podcast for those who want to add more flavor to their relationships with themselves and others. If you liked today's episode, make sure to head over to Instagram and let her know. See you next week.